Excuse me. I'm calling the meeting, the May 9th meeting, 2018 meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Sonnenfeld.
Present.
Hirschbein.
Present.
Hudson is excused. Maruzzi.
Here.
Woods.
Here.
Vice Chair Kellerstein.
Here.
And Chair Wormack.
Here.
6 members present. We have a quorum.
Can we have a report on the posting of the agenda?
Madam Chair, the agenda was posted on Thursday, May the 3rd. This meeting has been noticed and posted in accordance with state law.
Can I have a motion on the acceptance of the agenda? Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now we are at public comments. This is a time that's been set aside for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on consent calendar and other agenda items and items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission. Please note that the Commission is prohibited from taking action on items not listed on the posted agenda. 3 minutes is allowed for each speaker. If you are here on item 2A, that is a public hearing item, and you're able to test, and we are reopening that public hearing. It was an item on our last meeting. So if you're here on the text amendment, you can comment in public comment or during the public hearing on that item. If you're here for 4A, which is the major architectural for a house in the Desert Palisades, this would be the time that you would speak during the public comment period. Thank you. The public hearing is open. Is there anyone who wishes to address the Commission?
Comment.
There being, okay. Please come forward, state your name, and you have.
Hi, I'm Brett Woods. I'm the owner, and we are the architecture firm for the house, the presentation for the house in the Desert Palisades. I want to quickly give you a little bit of a background on the house. We have just went through the AAC, and the home is a single-family home, a 3,800 square foot single-family home that we are proposing for our family. The orientation of the house is important to mention or to note because obviously being up in the Palisades, everyone here understands there's many views to capture. We felt it was a priority for us to orientate the house towards San Jacinto. So the main public space itself has direct views to San Jacinto and then back out towards the valley floor. Also, the orientation of the house itself lends itself to a swimming pool that is directly adjacent or close to the front property line or the front of the street. The materials for the project, we have selected materials that would be consistent with the specific plan of the Desert Palisades. They are also consistent with the color tones and timeless nature of kind of the Desert Palisades and also the climate. The last thing that I would like to mention really about the house is that you would see that the house itself lifts itself off of the natural terrain. In the specific plan, constantly they're mentioning making sure that the house has a small footprint or actually respects the existing native terrain. This house does just that. You will see that there are 2 locations of the master and the main public space where they lift up and they let the natural arroyos run underneath the house. Again, kind of respecting that natural terrain. Also, the house itself is not a stepped house. It's on 1 story. You will see that it steps down from the street, so therefore one side of the house is on grade because the property is, for the most part, pretty flat. And then as it moves away to the east, the house stays flat, the hillside peels away, therefore kind of respecting, again, that natural terrain. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We may, please stay, we may call you up for questions later.
Absolutely.
Is there any other member of the public who'd like to speak? There being no one else, the public hearing, the public comment period is over. The first item is the consent calendar. This is the approval of the minutes for April 11th, 2011 and April 25th, 2018.
I'll move the consent calendar.
Madam Chairman, I will abstain from the approval of the minutes of April 11 since I was not present.
Commissioner Hirschfeld?
Yeah, and I will abstain from the 2018, is it 2000? I mean, April 8.
25?
25, yes, thank you.
Fine, yes. Commissioner
And I
Woods.
would abstain because I was not present for April 25th, although I don't know if it's necessary to abstain if you weren't here.
We have a motion by Commissioner Callardine. I will second that motion. All in favor?
We're going to vote by,
Are we going to? Fine, we'll vote. Thank you. That carries 6-0 with one absent. The next item is item 2A. It's the City of Palm Springs for a request to consider a zone text amendment to amend Palm Springs zoning code section 91.00.10, 92.09.01, and 92.09.02 to allow grocery stores within the central business district and to provide for other minor modifications and corrections. This came before us last time, but because we know we will have some new issues and new testimony, and several of our members weren't here and didn't listen to the past hearing, I think I would ask for a full staff report, please.
Madam Chair and members of the Commission, to give you some background on this proposed zone text amendment, the City's Council's Subcommittee on Business Retention met a couple of months ago, and among a number of items that they discussed, one of the things they talked about was the importance of having grocery stores available to our residents. Our city's general plan talks about the need to have grocery stores in the downtown area. What is unfortunate is that our zoning code specifically prohibits grocery stores in the downtown area. And so that was the genesis of this zone text amendment that's before you today. What we are proposing is to allow grocery stores that are under 15,000 square feet in area as a permitted use, and grocery stores over 15,000 square feet in area as a conditional use in the CBD or Central Business District zone. So that, again, is the primary reason why we are here today. As part of that, one of the things that we as staff like to do is when we have the opportunity to clean up ordinances, we like to do that. And in looking at the list of uses, there are many uses within this ordinance that could be collapsed. For example, we have a list of very specific retail uses, which in many cases are archaic or out of date. And so what I'm proposing to do is to condense those all down under a single category of retail use. And in a similar fashion, personal service uses such as dry cleaners, hair salons, tailors, shoe repair, rather than listing all of those individually, I've collapsed those all into a single category. So with that, you will see that we are trying to streamline the list of uses and simplify that as well. At our discussion on April the 25th, we received public comment about the possibility of including animal kennels as a permitted use in the downtown area. The Planning Commission discussed the topic and requested that staff come back with additional information on that. In addition, we've received 2 public comment letters on the issue, which were included in the backup for your package here today. Let me just discuss briefly how we treat animal kennels in the city of Palm Springs. First of all, there is currently a dog daycare facility in the downtown area. We treat animal daycare much the same as we treat pet stores, in that it is a limited time use and has no more impact than the standard retail use of a pet store. And so for that reason, we've allowed that as a permitted use. The request was actually to allow overnight stays, and so that would be a full kennel facility. Now, in the city of Palm Springs, we only allow full kennel facilities in our industrial zoning districts, the M1, M2, M1P, and EI, I believe, if I'm quoting that correctly from my backup information. In looking at whether or not we should allow kennels in the central business district, I did some additional research and have provided that for you, looking at other cities in the Coachella Valley. What you will find is that most of them generally only allow kennels in industrial zones. Some of them have agricultural zones, and so they're allowed there. In Palm Desert, they have a residential estates, which is not the same as our residential estates. It's a rural zone, and they do allow animal kennels in that zone upon the approval of a conditional use permit. I failed to include one of the cities, La Quinta. A question was raised as to where they allow kennels in La Quinta. From the information I was able to pull off of their online zoning code, similar to the other cities in the Coachella Valley, the information that I have is they allow that in their commercial park zoning district by a conditional use permit. Commercial park is similar to our business park or light industrial district. And then the second zone where they allow it by a conditional use permit is under the major community facility zone, which would be comparable to a civic zoning district where you have uses such as government facilities, police stations, utility substations, those types of things. So again, I did not have that in the backup information for you. I was able to pull that off the internet, and that information is included for your consideration today. Just generally, is an animal kennel an appropriate use in the central business district? While it potentially could be with a number of restrictions, just based on my experience, I would recommend against it. There are a number of reasons why I would provide that recommendation to you. Number one is relative to potential noise, not only from the animal kennel, but we have entertainment uses in the downtown area that may impact the animals in the kennel facility itself. So there is that consideration. With the waste that is generated by the kennel facility, for a daycare facility, that's relatively minimal, but when you start doing 24-hour care, that becomes a little bit more problematic. And so I do have concerns professionally on that standpoint. And then another issue is relative to impacts to adjacent businesses. We need to make sure that the kennel can be adequately soundproof so that it doesn't impact adjacent stores. And then finally, making sure that we have enough area for the animals themselves. I've provided some standards in your packet, but typically with urban properties, it doesn't offer outdoor space or the type of large indoor space that may be necessary for animals to exercise and to have that type of activity. So for those reasons, generally I don't feel it to be a good practice. However, if the Planning Commission were to consider this, I do have a list of things that you should include. Number one, I would keep it out of the historic village center, which is defined as that portion between Baristo on the south and Amado on the north, and only allow it in the outlying areas of the central business district. So that would be around Ramon and Alejo. Secondly, I would require it to be a conditional use permit, so it requires some type of public review, and we consider such things as the impact to adjacent businesses. Third, I would request that there be minimum standards for soundproofing. Typically, that can best be handled by having masonry block walls that separate the kennel space from adjacent businesses. And then fourth, one of the things I would encourage is that we not only amend the zoning code to include that as a permitted use, but I'd recommend that we also amend the municipal code to establish minimum standards for kennels. And I've included examples of such ordinances from the city of Burbank and the city of Newport Beach, where it addresses things that we typically don't include in a zoning ordinance, such as the welfare of the animals, the construction of the facility, things like that. And so that would be my recommendation to you today. If you are to consider animal kennels as a permitted use, that we do two things. Number one, we would amend the zoning code to require it to be a conditional use permit. And then secondly, pursue amending the municipal code to add basic standards for kennels generally. So that concludes my presentation in terms of the animal kennels. One of the other things that the Planning Commission had requested at their last meeting was that I provide you with a strikeout, underline, or redline version of the ordinance to show how I am condensing the uses, how I am streamlining the ordinance. I emailed a copy of that to you on Monday and then provided a hard copy of that with you here today. And if you'd like, I can go into some additional detail as we get to questions of staff on those particular changes. But that concludes my presentation. As the chair has mentioned, the public hearing has been reopened. I know that there are members of the public who would like to testify on the issue of animal kennels, and there may be other public comments as well. And I would be happy to take your questions.
At this point, questions of staff. I'm going to start with Commissioner Donenfeld and then go around.
Even as I understand it, currently Palm Springs does not have on its books an ordinance or statute that regulates kennel care, unlike the ones you're showing us from other jurisdictions.
Let me clarify that. The other jurisdictions, in some cases, don't have those basic standards either. What we typically find is that in smaller jurisdictions, smaller cities, because they have so few kennel facilities, there's not really a need to adopt the minimum standards, that they typically review those on a case-by-case basis. Larger cities, I believe Indio has those standards in place, and the other cities that I had indicated from Los Angeles County, Orange County, have minimum standards in place.
Seeing that we have none, would you also attached the United States Department of Agriculture's guidelines on animal welfare, the Animal Welfare Act? Would Palm Springs and its operators of kennels be subject to these requirements?
If we adopt them as regulations
Oh,
in
they'd
our
have to be
code.
adopted, otherwise, as a matter of federal law, they don't apply?
Well, no, they would apply as well, but I think it would be helpful for us to adopt them in addition,
I
so
see.
that gives the city the opportunity to review those facilities.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hirschbein.
I wasn't here last time, so excuse me if this was already covered, but I had a couple of questions. How did the issue of the kennel come up? Was it something that came up from the commission? Or?
No, it came up during public testimony at our last meeting on the 25th.
Okay.
And so the Planning Commission considered that comment and requested additional information.
Okay. And I have another question. In terms of two other questions. So am I to understand from the report that you just gave that all of the uses that are currently permitted in the CBD would still be permitted? You just kind of redefine them and put them in categories?
That's a good way to summarize it, yes.
Okay, thank you for that. And finally, in terms of the grocery stores, this is more going from planning to urban design, and that is, I would have a concern about a grocery store, for instance, in the main part of the pedestrian area of Palm Canyon, if there was a large frontage of that grocery store on Palm Canyon, say 200 or 300 feet or 500 feet, because it would stifle pedestrian activity in that area. And I notice we're qualifying certain things in this proposal, i.e. the size of grocery stores. Would it be appropriate if we also wanted to limit the size of frontage on main thoroughfares for a grocery store in terms of the zoning code?
Certainly, and that's a good thing to ask, a good question to ask. Obviously, with your larger big box stores, they aren't as pedestrian friendly generally as the smaller retail shops. And so your question in terms of frontage is a good one. There's a couple of different ways to address that. Number one, you can do it through either limiting the square footage. For example, what you might look at is rather than having 15,000 square feet be the cutoff, maybe the cutoff should be 7,500 square feet. That keeps it at a reasonable size that it's not going to occupy as much frontage or impact the pedestrian realm. The other way, as you suggest, is to limit it by storefront, that grocery stores with a Frontage of less than, let's say, 100 feet, for example, would be permitted by right, and those over 100 feet would either be a land use permit or a conditional use permit. So there's a couple of ways to do that, but again, I think your comment is a good one to be addressed.
And it could be covered in the zoning code?
Yes, those are standards that could be covered in the zoning code, correct?
And you threw out the number 100 feet. Is that kind of, I'm not current on sort of current planning, not requirements, but strategies for maintaining an urban, a pedestrian environment. Is that something, I'm not saying you'd recommend necessarily, but is that a number that would be appropriate for that, I would say?
It's a number that I just selected for the purposes of our discussion. I think we could refine that by saying, thinking how long a block is. For example, a standard block is about 400 feet long. 100 feet would be 1/4 of that frontage. I think you could probably go up to about 150 or 200 feet before you want to look at having them go through some type of a conditional use permit process where we can look at the impacts to the pedestrian experience.
Okay, thank you for that discussion.
Commissioner Maruzzi and Commissioner Woods, do you have questions?
I don't recall if we discussed this last time. How did this issue come up about the market?
It came up through the City Council Subcommittee on Business Retention. They had a meeting a couple of months ago where the issue of access to food was discussed. There's a concept in the planning community called food deserts, where neighborhoods don't have access to fresh foods, and trying to overcome that and correct that. The downtown area is one of those areas, and by virtue of our zoning code, it specifically prohibits grocery stores.
Do we have any applicants or anyone in the background that we know might be considering this?
Actually, I have been contacted several times in the past couple of years about the vacant Staples store that is on South Indian Canyon, South Palm Canyon.
Additionally, just may jump in here.
Hold on, don't jump in. Let's go in
No,
order.
I'm finished. Thank you.
Commissioner Woods?
Hi, Flynn. Just a couple questions. Thank you for the red line. It made it much easier, by the way. Just on the page one, when we talk about permitted uses, there's two of them for cannabis. And I'm not up to date on our current cannabis stuff. And why would that not be under a CUP requirement?
That was the way that City Council had approved those uses back in December of 2017. And what they did was they allow the two different uses. One is the dispensary use, the other is the lounge use. Now, while they don't require a conditional use permit, they are permitted uses. One of the things that we have to look at in the specific standards for cannabis uses is separation distances and proximity to protected uses. So that's kind of a natural factor that helps to control those uses, if you will.
So with this, so they're not under a CUP process. Under the process that they're under, can conditions be added?
Correct, they can.
Okay.
Staff can review those relative to our specific standards for cannabis uses and condition them accordingly.
Okay, and those are operating conditions where if they don't abide by those conditions, they can be withdrawn. Okay.
Exactly.
The other question I have is I noticed we didn't have visitor center here. We have library. We currently have a library visitor center. Would there be an objection, or is it redundant to add visitor center?
It is not, and let me just see, which page are you on?
I saw it under, hold on, there's a lot to read. Libraries are permitted on page 7.
Okay.
Under 10.
Okay.
D10 as libraries. I don't know if it can be /visitor center or add another one. I'm not quite sure how we.
Yes, I think that's something that we could do, and we would support that.
And just in reading the red line on my phone earlier in the week, was there anything, we're not allowing any sort of drive-through businesses?
That is correct.
Okay.
The only way that we allow them is where they are specifically permitted. You'll see under the uses prohibited drive-in and drive-through facilities. The reason for that, again, this is a pedestrian district, and so auto-oriented uses should be outside of the central business district. I believe the one instance where we allow it is for bank facilities, if I remember correctly, financial institutions, but that's by a conditional use permit. And so that does go through a public review process.
And was there a reason we even allowed in this draft a bank to have a drive-through?
Just because we had allowed it historically, I wasn't proposing to make any changes. If the Planning Commission would like to eliminate that, that's certainly something that you can recommend to the City Council.
And just in my recollection of the city, currently within this central business district, there is no bank with a drive-through. There is just outside of it, just off of Ramon, but I don't think anything within it has a.
You may be correct. The institutions that we have on South Palm Canyon, just north of Ramon, I believe, have eliminated drive-through facilities. And typically, you don't find very many of those anymore with us moving to a more electronic format.
Thank you.
Commissioner Calverdine.
Yeah, thanks for the, this tile
Please,
thing
can you
is-
turn that off?
Turn it off. Thank you for the red line, and which allowed me to come up with a whole bunch more questions, unfortunately. Starting with antique shops, and I noticed that there's various sort of places where we sell old goods. Is there a distinction between used goods stores and antique shops, and then pawn shops? And you would also think about consignment stores, but I don't think are mentioned there, but we have a lot of people that sell on consignment downtown now.
Yes, there is a distinction between those uses. In terms of how we would allow that, we have many uses, especially in our Uptown Design District, where they're selling things such as vintage furniture or mid-century modern furniture and ephemera and things like that. Those would be covered under our general definition of antique shops, because typically most of those items are 50 years old or older, and so that fits under the definition.
Is that a definition of antique
shops.
for that purpose?
Consignment would be allowed. We do have a definition, I believe, for thrift store, which separates out the donation of goods for some type of a charitable organization as having to be in other districts in the city. And so we have kept this rather focused, I think, on uses that are appropriate in the downtown area and the design district, the Uptown Design District as well.
Thinking through, we sort of had allusion to it by Commissioner Erskine, but when we go to the grocery stores less than 15,000 square feet, is a 7-Eleven considered a grocery store?
I consider 7-Eleven to be more along the lines of a retail store. It's smaller in format. I think there's a way that it could be interpreted both ways.
Well, if it's generally smaller than 15,000 square feet, so if it's under your definition as just general retail, then it would be permitted.
Correct.
Because those tend to be very controversial. But my note there. My immediate thought on looking at it this week when I reviewed it again, do we want the same limitations on hardware stores that we have on grocery stores? Because we say hardware stores are an allowed use, but we certainly wouldn't want a Home Depot type of thing. Again, a big box type store where I keep thinking living in San Francisco where we had all these little neighborhood hardware stores, and those would be great. Do we want that same type of restriction on some of the other big box uses?
That actually is a very good point. One of the things that we might consider is in the section on conditional use permits, what we might do is any retail store greater than X number of square feet in area to require a conditional use permit to address the same things that Mr. Hirschbein brought up earlier in terms of the pedestrian realm and experience. And so I think that would be a good suggestion and something that we might include.
I went through here to try to make sure everything was covered one way or another, and under one item we had, just under grocery stores, we had, under the old thing, we had private clubs and condominiums under hotels. How did that get addressed? I didn't see that elsewhere.
What I did was I did that as multifamily uses, and those are under the conditional use permit section.
Okay, so you would consider the private clubs to be?
As a residential use, yes.
Okay.
Either a timeshare hotel, which we would consider as a hotel, or if it's an extended type of facility, then I would consider it to be a multifamily residential use.
When we get to the new section entitled retail stores, do you want to add a parenthetical there, except where noted below for?
Let's see.
Line, well, it'd be page 3, line XX, but just below 47.
Okay. So except as otherwise conditioned.
Right, that would make, and I
You're
think-
not making suggestions now, you're asking questions.
Right, should we? Okay, and then where, one last one I found was missing was blueprinting and photocopying under again, C1 by land use permit, page 4 of the report under So it would be C1 E. Didn't see where that one fell. Again, unless that's considered a retail store, you would think.
Typically, how that industry has changed over the years is that we don't have separate copying shops anymore. That typically they are becoming mailing stores like FedEx, UPS, where they do both services. And so typically we would consider those to be retail stores now as they've changed in the marketplace.
Any more I got here? Oh, yes, we get down to multifamily residential on page 7. Near the bottom of the page, it says, it's under item 13, again, another XX multifamily residential. As opposed to second-story residential, what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, the difference between the two, you'll find that under the land use permit section, we allow the conversion of second-story office space to residential by a land use permit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm proposing to allow multifamily residential as a conditional use permit, and so that is for new multifamily residential uses.
It's only the conversion that would be
It's
land use
only the
permit.
conversion that would be the land use permit process. And again, this is something that the Planning Commission may wish to discuss.
Okay, that's all my questions, Madam Chair.
I had a couple as well. On the kennels, and it's on page 4, permits by land use, kennels, animal daycare facilities, not kennels. Have you thought about limiting that to outside of the village center? And that, my thinking on that is parking. It's a pretty highly parked use. So on the ends where we're not requiring lots and lots of short. The village center, I believe, goes to Baristo, from Baristo to
Amato.
To Amato.
Yeah. So in terms of that, as you suggest, with the traffic associated with the kennel daycare facilities, you typically have a pickup and drop-off times associated with that. So you need to accommodate that through some type of parking lot so that it doesn't occur on the street. That may be appropriate to limit it to outside of the historic village center, and again, keep it on the periphery of our central business district.
And following up on Commissioner Hirschbein's suggestion, possibly making retail, ground floor retail that's above, that takes up more than 200 square feet, something that requires a land use permit, so that we would have that in general, so that we don't end up with larger stores
Wouldn't it be a
unless we
CUP?
want them. To think about, a CUP costs more money. Flynn reminded me that it's $5,000 instead of 1,000, so that I don't think we want to put as many things. That's a discussion item. I'd want you to see what your thoughts are on that. Under multifamily residential, would you be opposed to adding the word new to multifamily residential?
I don't know that I would, and I'd look to our city attorney if he has any objections to us distinguishing new from existing.
And the only other comment that I had is that the way we handle hotels is a little strange. And I know it's historic, but is there any way of cleaning that up? It seems to me that if a hotel is coming in, that's possibly because of parking issues, that should really be at least a land use permit. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
What I might recommend, because hotels can kind of be a whole issue unto itself that we may want to look at here. We could address that today in the central business district. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Again, it has a different character than the other districts where we permit hotel uses. And so moving that from the permitted uses to a land use permit, I don't think would be an issue. And again, that gives us the ability to look at and condition the specific site plan for those. But as we look at hotels generally, we might want to think about them on a larger scale and maybe at a future time. Look at our standards for hotels and how we might better address them in our zoning code.
Commissioner, if it's a question, yes. Certainly.
I was
I'm
just
done.
reading that and we had this discussion regarding a hotel a while back. Did we find a rationale for the 10%, maxing out the 10% of guest rooms having kitchen facilities?
You know, unfortunately, I can't provide you background on that. That's something that we've had in our code historically. I just off the top of my head, I think it was a way to distinguish our full-time hotel uses from those that were primarily directed to our winter visitors, where they were having cooking accommodations. But again, why does it require a conditional use permit? That might be something that the Planning Commission wants to address as a
So we
separate
could address
issue.
that during the discussion?
You can address it in your discussion today, or again, I think that might be a larger issue that we may want to take up at a later date.
And I think I've come up with a list of items that we may want to address in discussion. If there are no further questions of staff,
Madam Chair, I have one question. Flynn, on page 7, number J at the very top, it says outdoor dining, and then we're removing including beverage service, and we've done that also on number D5. It says with or without dancing. Is there a reason we struck that out?
I didn't feel it to be necessary. Typically, most of or all of our restaurants have beverage service, and so it's accepted as accessory or a standard offering at our restaurant uses. So I just didn't feel that it was necessary. Same thing with nightclubs. With a nightclub, there generally is going to be dancing. So again, I just didn't feel that we need to enumerate it and call it out.
Thank you.
at this point, what I'd like to go to is the public hearing on this. This is, since the applicant is the city and we have heard from the applicant, what we'd like to do is hear from the public. You have 3 minutes if people are here to testify in this item. If you would please come up. That said, no one wants to testify on this item. I know we have some of the kennels that are interested, but if they're not coming up, okay. We do have letters. The public hearing is closed. If you would like to come up, I'll reopen the public hearing. Can you identify yourself, please? Oh, sorry, I have to. The mic should be on.
Yeah, his mic is on.
Hello?
And I just wanted to confirm for you that, yes, they did receive a copy of your letter in the backup materials.
So then that's, yeah, so that was everything that we would have stated today as well. Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Public hearing is closed. Okay, we have several items before us, and maybe we could take them one at a time so that we can go through them just for comment. Let me just start with some of the easy ones. Visitor Center, was there a general feeling from the commission we'd like to include that, and is staff okay with that? So that's a yes. The frontage for retail, having any frontage on Palm Canyon over 200 feet, do you only want that for grocery stores?
No, I like Mr. Callardine's suggestion to broaden it to any retail, because really it is about the frontage, not the use. But I'd like to reduce it to, I think 25% of a 400-foot-long block should be the maximum, so that gets you to 100 feet. They can always apply for relief if there's some special circumstance, but any use over 100 feet, I think we should look at.
But if we do any use over 100 feet, that would be an LUP?
Or a CUP.
Or a CUP, the question is?
The land use permit is done at the staff level. It's a ministerial approval. Again, as was brought up, we can do conditions of approval associated with that. The cost is much lower than the conditional use permit. Conditional use permit is a public hearing, comes before the Planning Commission, and the application fee is approximately $5,000 for that.
In order to come before Planning Commission, it's $5,000.
Correct.
Well, if you think about who's going to be applying for this, it's probably big national chains.
And I would think these could be very controversial issues. I think it should be appropriate for it to come before the Planning Commission.
So you're suggesting that any use on Palm Canyon, not the rest of the Central Business District?
I was thinking Indian and Palm Canyon.
Indian and Palm Canyon,
Or the sides, well, any use within the.
any use within the CBD over 100, with a frontage of over 100 square
and
feet?
I would go and or the 15,000 square foot. That would be another trigger.
Yeah.
I'm just, let's stay with this one first, one at a time. Is there general agreement that people would like that to be a CUP?
I would like more clarification on that if I can ask staff a question.
Yes, please.
So on our new downtown project, we have several new retail stores that have a lot of glass. Are those over 100 square feet?
100 linear feet?
Yeah, linear feet, excuse me.
Generally not. I think the only ones that would come close, West Elm, I believe, is less than 100 feet in terms of its frontage. H&M, I believe, is also approximately 100 feet or slightly less. It's right around that vicinity.
Starbucks?
But again, I'm doing this off the top of my head without having plans in
Starbucks
front
is
of me.
less.
Thank you.
So is there a general agreement on this? Let's go to the next one, which was
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, was that by conditional use permit?
by conditional use permit is
And Chair,
what,
was that the condition only the 100 feet of frontage?
100 feet, more than 100 feet of frontage.
Can we discuss, since it's logically tied to that, can we discuss whether we want a square footage trigger as well?
That's the next one I was going to go to, but that would be a separate item. So the question is, yes, a square footage trigger, so that any use that required a square footage above, and
15,000 square feet?
Flynn was suggesting 15,000 would also be a CUP. Generally in agreement.
Not necessarily. And I'd like to talk about that just a bit, and why we even need a square footage cap to move it to a CUP. There's many examples in the urban environment where they put in things like, if you look in downtown Santa Monica, they put in an REI. The street frontage is fantastic, but it goes up or back. There is a Target on Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood. Again, a huge, beautiful plaza. You go in and it's up and it's back. It actually enhances the purpose is to enhance the pedestrian right away. It enhances it by bringing people who are walking with parking underneath. So I'm not sure that a square footage.
The question was not to disallow it, but whether we would require it have a CUP so that we could make sure that the square footage worked in the correct way for the area that it was being put in.
Require a public review.
It would require a public review.
So let me just back up. Would that be required, do you think, in addition to the linear square footage of 100 on the front? Do you think they're both, isn't it a bit redundant?
If I can answer, Mr. Woods, the example you just gave is very innovative and creative, but there is a lot of fine tuning to make sure that if you've got a very limited linear square foot frontage, to be able to get that much square foot in the back of it, it's something that would take some thoughtful logistical planning, I would think, and something that we as a commission would want to look at, because it would be novel and creative and innovative, but it could be also very disruptive. I just think it's something that, as long as we're looking at the linear square footage, we might as well look at the total square footage if it exceeds 15,000, because we would want to look at those creative ways to see if they work for the city.
So a question for staff. Would that be a better question under the zoning code, kind of under the urban form? Or, because CUP is about how the use operates. And I understand that if it's bigger, there may be more parking and more traffic and things of that nature.
If it is going into an existing space, the chances are that you typically would not see that in front of Planning Commission. It's only new construction that you would see come before you. And so, for example, where it is going into an existing building, the conditional use permit is a way to bring that to a public meeting where we can discuss the issues of how that large footprint retail use impacts the pedestrian realm. So that's certainly something that can be considered as part of a conditional use permit. And again, for existing spaces, that's really the only way that you would see it. On the other hand, for new build, new construction, we would see a major architectural that would come through the Planning Commission, and that's the way that you would address it for new construction. So again, it just depends on what you think is the best approach to take, considering that there's new construction and then also existing spaces that could be filled.
Can I just comment on that?
Yes, please.
I support Commissioner Donenfeld's analysis, and you know, I think our downtown is a fairly modest scaled retail environment. It's not as large as West Hollywood's. It's not as, the blocks aren't as large. Same with, I believe, with Santa Monica, and it's a little finer scaled. And I think 15,000 is a good cutoff. I think above that, we would kind of want to have a bite at the apple to make sure that it's functioning in a way that we would be happy with.
As we're going through these, what I just did was make a motion to support the staff report with the changes where I'm beginning to see a quorum in favor. So I think the items that we've gone through, we've gotten to there. Let me take up next, I think, was the animal daycare facilities or kennels. I just wanted to make a comment on that. I support the staff report. I do think at some point we need a ordinance, but in the downtown, kennels, animals are staying there for multiple days, and they do need outdoor facilities, which, although you could operate a kennel entirely indoors, I think it would be very hard to operate, or it wouldn't be a kennel I would take my dog to where there were no outdoor facilities. So I think it's fine to leave the animal daycare facilities. I would suggest, and I don't know if I get support for both of these, moving that to the areas that they actually are, which is outside of the historic village center. And it still would be an LUP, but it would be in areas where parking, where
for the daycares?
It's for the daycares. And both the daycares that have come downtown have been, saying that, I really appreciate what the Grand Paw is doing, but I think we're looking at something broader in terms of what's right for our city. So I don't know if people agree with me on both of those, moving it to the village center, keeping it an LUP, and keeping it the way staff has written it.
I would agree.
Okay, we have pretty unanimous approval on that. Going through the rest of this, residential, you had it with the CUP, new multifamily residential. One question for you, Flynn. You had conversions on second floor spaces. If somebody was coming in with a second and above, if they were coming in with a approved retail use, it was new, but they wanted to do residential on the second floor, do you still feel like that needs a CUP?
I don't know that it necessarily needs a conditional use permit, as we would see that through a major architectural application. The question is, in terms of the use, do you want to address how residential may or may not be impacted by adjacent entertainment and commercial uses? So there are some questions of impacts that I think we need to look at. I don't know that it necessarily has to be done through a conditional use permit process, but that's fairly typical where you have residential in urban areas that you use a conditional use permit.
So under that, I will withdraw that request, and I would put the word new multifamily under the CUP process. Is there any disagreement with that?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just to clarify one item, do we say second floor, do we mean second floor or above?
Correct.
We probably ought to clarify that.
Is that which?
under the land use permit section that exists
So
currently.
that's a change also that we would suggest. Is second floor or above. Let me go through the rest of this
Have
and,
the building C,
pardon?
have that building C where that's a possibility.
I think that covers all of the items that were discussed or requested by the commission. Have I left anything out? Commissioner Woods, or Commissioner Wood and then Commissioner Hirschbein.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to propose that item on page 7, item D8 be removed, and that states financial institutions with drive-through facilities. We already allow financial institutions. There is no drive-through downtown. I don't think it's appropriate to have any drive-through in our downtown business core.
My question would be, with respect to any that currently exist, and I don't know of any offhand, but there might be, would they be grandfathered in?
Correct, they would be as legally permitted uses when they were established.
So is there general agreement to remove that? I think that's a yes. Commissioner Hirschbein.
A while back, a real estate office came before Planning Commission for approval for frontage on Palm Canyon. I know it was approved, but would a similar situation in the future have to come before us per these changes?
Correct. We haven't made any modifications to the requirements for office uses. I've just reworded them to hopefully clarify what is permitted within the historic village center and what's permitted outside of the historic village center.
And what brought that real estate office before us? What code requirement?
It exceeded the square footage that's permitted by right in the historic village center.
And what is that? Can you tell me?
I believe it's 2,500 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
Their office was larger than that.
Okay.
The only other item that we had was the description of hotels. And it does seem strange not to require at least an LUP, even if it's a small hotel. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, Flynn.
I think that's acceptable, again, looking at how it impacts or how it's impacted by adjacent businesses, circulation, pickup, drop-off, those types of things. It gives the staff the ability to condition those things.
And so would we use the small hotels, and I think the number of rooms, I can't remember.
I would actually just do it both. We have two categories of hotels, the hotel and then the resort hotel, which is over 100 rooms. Currently, they are both permitted uses in the downtown area. What I would recommend is that we keep them in that same category, do both of them by land use permit.
As a land use permit.
Yes.
So is there any,
I have a question about, we're talking about a new hotel or a conversion of, say, an apartment building, or what are we talking about? Because if it's
Either
It could be
case where
either.
they are establishing a new hotel use, they would require a land use permit.
Because if it's a new hotel, it would come before us anyway, right?
right, but if it's a conversion of an apartment building to a hotel,
That's
it
what
might,
this would cover.
and this would at least allow it to come before staff, and if staff felt they wanted to bring that to the commission, they could.
Okay, thanks.
So is general agreement on that?
Can I just get clarification? You're asking to remove it from conditional use, D9? You're asking to have it taken out here? I'm just not clear.
Hold on. No, I wasn't. I was,
No, going back to, I'm sorry if I can just jump in here, going back to page 2, following number 27.
the ones that require a CUP are hotels with more than 10% of the kitchens, and I think there probably was historic reason for it and probably good to keep it.
Yeah. And so, Mr. Woods, what would happen is that the hotels without kitchens, which are currently permitted by right, would now require a land use permit.
Okay, thank you.
I think that would be my motion. We have a second. Do you agree, the second to agree with?
I have a question for staff first, but yes.
Of course.
Staff, this doesn't change the CEQA analysis by adding and moving around any additional uses, so that the CEQA analysis still remains fine.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other comments on this before we call a vote? Flynn, do you need to read this back to us, or do you have?
No, I have these enumerated. There were 7 changes, categories of changes that you made, and I do have those listed.
Is this the final?
This is final.
Okay.
Would you call the roll, please, unless there are comments?
So this is a recommendation to council, is that what this is?
Correct. As is standard for any zone text amendment, the Planning Commission makes a recommendation. City Council then considers it at a public hearing and actually requires 2 readings of the ordinance. So it will go to 2 City Council meetings for consideration.
Thank you.
Commissioner Woods, if you could. This passes 6-0 with 1 absence.
You want to take a break? Or?
That may be the parent.
We're going to leave it? How about there's not enough closets, please?
Just, I'm going to pause the hearing for 1 minute. I want to confer with staff.
You want to give us 5 minutes to?
I can pause for 5 minutes until 2:40. we get to the next item, there is a model in front of us. If everybody hasn't had a chance to look at it, shall we take a minute to let the commission look at the model, and it will stay there during discussion so that we will have a chance to ask the architect questions about it. You can't do that. No, you can ask questions of him when we get into the item. I just want you to take a look at it now, and we will. Lynn's going to address it. So I don't have to. That was my question. Okay, this is a new business item. Brett Woods, owner for a major architectural review for the construction of a 3,800 square foot single-family house on a hilltop lot located at 2212 Winter Sun Drive in Desert Palisades. Staff report, please, and comments from the director if you have some.
Thank you, Chair. This project, as you mentioned, is in the Desert Palisades specific plan. The Planning Commission is charged reviewing this project against several guidelines that include the Hillside Development Guidelines, architectural review of the zoning code, and then within the Desert Palisades specific plan, there are development standards, standards for architecture and site design, and also landscaping guidelines within the specific plan. So the project before you is for a 3,800 square foot house located at Lot 3 of the Desert Palisades project, which is at the entrance to the development. When you come up Racket Club, it is off of the main drive just north of the gatehouse. So in describing the site plan, the proposed home will be located on a lot that slopes downward roughly 12 feet from the west to the east from an elevation of 899 feet to 887 feet. So looking at the slide that's before you here, the upper left side is the high side and the lower side to the bottom of the slide is the lower side. So this is a design that is superimposed over top of the topography of the site. And as you can see, there are two auroras that run through the middle of both sides of the property, with to the east side or to the right side of the slide, there's a large boulder berm which delineates the perimeter of the Desert Palisades project. So the house that's proposed will sit 5 feet below Winter Sun Drive. So as you come into the site, the driveway will slope downwards to the motor court. When we look at mass and scale of the project, the house is proposed, let me turn to a slide, at 16 feet 7 inches as measured from the downslope side of the project. Let me bring up a slide that shows the orientation of the house. So in this slide, from the down portion of the slope of the house to the top of the concrete block is 16 feet 7 inches. When you look at the at-grade site, the maximum height of the house is 10 feet 3 inches tall. The house is broken into two different wings. There's a east wing and a west wing. Each one of these wings is 1 story and contains living areas, kitchen areas, several bedrooms, and guest rooms. So when we look at the mass and the scale, the Desert Palisades project has what's called a pillow window area, which is the maximum height that can be within a Desert Palisades house is 18 feet. So the proposed project at 16 feet 7 inches at the highest point does fit within this pillow area and meets that standard. The house is contemporary in design. Building materials include masonry CMU block of a natural gray color, smooth plaster dove gray, Corten steel, aluminum windows and door frames of a bronze color, and Ipe material for the pool and spa decking. And the roof will be tan. I had dropped off the material board with Commissioner Callardine that we can pass around, and you can see what the materials are. Let me go to a landscape plan. So in the landscaping proposed for the project, there is a row of Palo Verde trees at the west side of the project and various desert plantings that are throughout the site. The Desert Palisades specific plan does include a specific plant list that is required on the site, and the proposed plan conforms to those standards for landscaping. In your packet, there is a series of 3D drawings that show the orientation of the house. I would like to draw your attention to the left-hand side. There's a brown sort of rectangular box. This is the area that will contain all of the equipment, the pool equipment, heating, air conditioning equipment. The motor court that will come in to the site is a driveway that will come off of Winter Sun Drive. The Desert Palisades project requires that the driveway entrance be no wider than 12 feet. They're actually proposing a 10-foot wide driveway that opens up to a 28-foot wide motor court. And that motor court is measured from the very side of the right side of the property to the garage entrance. So the Desert Palisades plan requires that these homes have a garage that does not front the street. That's why the garage is at a 90-degree angle to the street, and most of the houses that are in Desert Palisades, actually there are only 3, have the same sort of motor court condition where you drive down a driveway and you make a turn into the garage. So the Architectural Advisory Committee reviewed this project on April 16, 2018, and they had several recommendations to the Planning Commission. One was that they wanted to look at reducing this motor court area. It was a comment that came up at the end of the meeting, end of the discussion, about one member felt that the motor court was too large. The AAC also wanted a detail or cross-section of the pool area, and I do have that at the very end of this presentation, so let me get to it. So this slide shows the detail from Winter Sun Drive, which is to the left. The house is set back more than 25 feet from the street, and there'll be a boulder berm or natural landscaping, and then there's a proposed CMU wall, a little bit of a planter area, and then the pool, and then the deck, the spa, and the house. So the AAC was mostly concerned about how this wall would be viewed from the street. So they did provide that detail. Let me go back to one of the 3D images. So they were concerned about what this wall would look like from the street. And one more slide. So the street is to the top end of this slide, showing the pool, the wall, the driveway, and then the street. The AAC also recommended that the roof color not be white. The applicant has determined that the roof will not be a white, it'll be a tan color. And AAC also wanted to see the paver color for the motor court and driveway, which will be a tan brown color. So within your staff report, there are multiple tables that have evaluated the project based upon the Desert Palisades specific plan, and the plan as proposed does meet all of these standards and conditions. The project was reviewed, the Desert Palisades project was reviewed as a CEQA analysis for the overall project. This house would be considered exempt, and a notice of exemption will be filed once the Planning Commission has completed their review. There are minutes of the AAC meeting that are in your packet. There are some additional materials that were distributed to you today, and they include the additional materials, which is the cross-section of the wall in the street, which was the last slide that we looked at. There's a letter from Attorney Diane Blaisdell, which Planning Director will address. And there's also a set of photographs that were submitted today by the applicant. And what these photographs show are other motor courts within the Desert Palisades project, mainly the O2 house, which is just down the street. So the applicant wishes to leave the motor court at its current size, and that's these photographs are to show that the proposed motor court is less in size than what the O2 house currently has. So, Madam Chair, that concludes my report. The applicant is here, and I can answer any questions you may have.
Madam Chair, if I might, I would just like to address the public comment letter that we received this morning and has been provided to you there at the dais. The letter is objecting to the participation of Commissioner Woods on these actions at Desert Palisades. I just want to let you know that the City Attorney, Mr. Kotkin, has reviewed this letter and has opined that Mr. Woods is free to participate in these discussions, that he is not prejudiced in terms of the consideration of this matter, and again, is free to participate in this discussion and this action.
Thank you. Questions of staff, starting with Commissioner Donenfeld?
You mentioned, Glenn, that the utilities, pool equipment, various condensers and other things that are noisy and difficult to look at are going to be contained in what appears to be a long rectangular box, something I've never quite seen before. And my question is it a self-contained box? Does it ventilate? Because obviously a lot of this equipment will need ventilation. How is it supposed to work?
The original application had this equipment area at the property line, which the specific plan does not allow. So it was moved, and in this slide, it's the box at the very top of the house. Obviously, it'll have to be vented. Doesn't have a lid on it, but
it doesn't have a lid.
It does not, but it will have sides that will screen it from when the next house comes in or from the street.
What will the material be on this box from the material boards?
The proposed material is a Corten steel. So it may be raised off of the ground a little bit so the air can flow in. The applicant can maybe describe it better.
We will, after questions of staff, we will ask the applicant to come up for questions. I'm assuming there will be some. Going down, Commissioner Hirschbein.
In terms of the AAC recommendations, the one on the motor court, what we're looking at now, does that represent a revised motor court or the one that was presented to AAC?
What's before you today is what was provided to AAC. The applicant does not agree with that recommendation.
Okay. And also the tree placement, likewise, that's what was presented to AAC originally,
That's correct.
That's what we're looking
The
at?
applicant said, I don't want to speak for him, but he has expressed that the trees could be moved.
Okay, and then I'm just trying to find the other comments. Are there other recommendations? Oh, the roof they agreed to
Correct.
for white, and the pool wall they're showing in the
The detail.
section. Does that, and to your recollection of the AAC comments, does that section then conform to what you think they were looking for? Not in terms of the drawing, but in terms of the actual build.
I believe that would satisfy they were a little unclear of how that section would work. I think this would be clear to them now.
Yeah, no, they'll understand it, but would that height satisfy their concern?
I agree. I assume, yes, my understanding is it would.
Okay, and what was the other one? Oh, and the pavers we got.
We do not have a exact sample of the pavers. The applicant may be able to describe it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Other questions, Commissioner Marucci?
You mentioned something about the issue of the motor court was brought up at the end of the AAC discussion. How did that work?
Right. The AAC is similar to the Planning Commission, their deliberations discussion. It was not brought up at the beginning of the meeting. It was one member at the end felt that when we go through, the chair asked for everyone to discuss, that it was one item that came up. And like we normally do, it is recorded and as a recommendation to the Planning Commission.
So one person's opinion on the AAC will be recorded as an AAC recommendation?
Just a point of
vote.
order on this. If you look at the notes, Commissioner Cassidy, or Vice Chair Cassidy made a motion, suggested, seconded by Lockyer. Even if one person had done it, it was a motion of the entire body.
So it was a motion?
It was a motion with
Okay.
7 people voting
All right,
yes.
so that answers the question that I
Yes.
was asking, yeah. Thanks.
Commissioner Woods.
Just a simple question. I think that there's a safety standard by which you need a wall around the pool. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And how high does that need to be?
The building code requires it to be 5 feet.
Okay. And I think that the discussion at the AAC was because they had talked about trying to screen that wall with boulders, but that would reduce the actual height to less than 5 feet, and it needs to be a 5-foot wall. Is
Right,
that
the
correct?
appearance would be lower with the boulder wall.
Right, because somebody could stand on top of a boulder and then hop the fence and it would be less than 5 feet.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Keller.
I have a question to clarify the Architectural Committee's concern on that wall. I understand they were concerned about the way that the building would look with the pool wall and the major CMU, I guess you call it, the thick walls from Desert, Winter Sun Drive, I guess it's called. Do we really have a drawing that shows us from the street? Maybe we do, and I haven't been able to find it.
Well, other than the section that was provided, which is a section taking it from north to south.
Right.
The slide that's before you here is a drawing of 3D representation of what it would look like.
Okay. All right. I don't think we really addressed what it looks like from the street level, but that's.
One question with the AAC, when they were looking at the Corten steel on that, it obviously needs to be 5 feet high, but it doesn't need to be a wall. It could be a fence, or it could be something that the air lets air and light in, correct?
Around the equipment?
Yeah, no, around the pool. The pool doesn't require, I think the AAC's concern was the fact that it was a single substance as opposed to some kind of fencing. Is that correct?
Well, I don't recall any discussion of if it could be a wrought iron fence versus a wall.
But they were concerned about how the wall would look from the street.
That was the concern, yes.
Okay. And the height of the wall as you go down, it looks to me like it's well placed so that the initial part of it is at grade or a little bit below grade?
At the lowest point or at the bottom of the slide, it would still have to be 5 feet tall, so no one could,
And the interior
over it.
portion?
right.
But it's more than 5 feet on the exterior
As the
frontage.
slope goes down, yes.
I think those may be questions next for the applicant. But before we get that, I had a question for staff on the, there was an additional comment on the motor court to screen it from headlights. And I don't know that that made it into the motion, but it was one of the reasons they wanted to make the trees a little bit softer. Has that been addressed at all?
It has not.
And is that motor court immediately adjacent to the neighbor's property, or is there an area in between the two properties that is sort of a trail area, and how wide is that?
There, I know it's kind of hard to see on this, this slide, but there are dashed lines, there are easements that separates the lots. So even though the property line, the motor court ends at one of those easement lines, there's an additional, I think it's 7 feet between that and where the property line actually ends, and then another 7 feet where the other lot development would begin.
So it's 14 feet to where the next lot begins. And that 14 feet, is that meant to be a public trail?
It's open space that was part of the development approval. That's between all of these lots. There's an easement that runs between each of these lots.
And so in terms of headlights for the neighbor, the closest the neighbor could be would be 14 feet, and then what's the setback for the next house?
It would be 10 feet on the side.
So it would be 24 feet between the edge of the motor court and the next structure, although maybe only 14 feet to the next motor court.
Right, that would be correct. And you can see the angle of the street sort of turns, so a car that lights may be directed towards the street versus a house next door.
And staff's opinion on the motor court issue?
It conforms to the design standards of the Palisades, so we had no position.
And the material for the motor court, is it permeable? It's a lot of pavement, so is it permeable?
The design guidelines requires that it be a permeable surface so that the water would seep down through the joints of the driveway.
So it wouldn't create a runoff problem?
It should
Shouldn't.
not.
Okay.
I have one related question. The AAC did request that there be a rearranging of the trees to eliminate any potential from the headlights. And the applicant is willing to make that change pursuant to AAC's recommendation?
My understanding is that the AAC was concerned about the linear nature of the planting of the trees, so a staggering situation would be more natural looking to them.
So they were not concerned about the trees as a buffer to the headlight issue?
It was a discussion item. The applicant is willing to stagger the trees, and they may be willing to add additional landscaping to buffer the headlights.
Okay, thank you.
At this point, I think we have a number of questions for the applicant. If you would come up on this gorgeous project. I think you've heard some of the questions there. Commissioner Hirschbein, do you want to?
I'd like a presentation, actually. We didn't have any
He did give us a presentation at the beginning of the meeting. Do you want more than that?
a little bit. Yeah.
Brett, do you want to come up and talk from the slide?
That'd be fine if you talk from the slides. We have such a busy agenda. We have time for this.
So maybe it's best that we start with the motor court, since this happens to be the topic of conversation at this point, and certainly happy to kind of walk you through the placement of the property or the actual structure and the motor court. So just to back up and be totally clear with you, the comment was made kind of in the 11th hour of the discussion. I don't agree with the comment, obviously, but I'll hopefully can talk through that with you in this presentation. So the actual property itself, per the specific plan, is really supposed to challenge the applicant or the designer or the architect to delicately touch the native terrain. And so the difficulty in there is that we have to put a structure, but also having the responsibility of not disrupting that terrain. So for us on this property on Lot 3, we looked at the majority of the lots. Lot 3 was, for us, probably had the most potential to work with a hillside home because it was mostly flat. And you'll see here at the entrance of the motor court that the natural grade sloping from Winterson Drive to grade at the motor court drops roughly 4.5 feet. That is, again, natural grade. So we have not used any retaining walls to, again, disrupt natural flows on the site, so to let those natural flows continue through. The actual motor court itself, again, because the specific plan is pretty clear about parking, and it's my understanding that they discourage any parking or won't let people park on the side of the street. So if you build a house there and you happen to have guests come over, it's difficult to have them park somewhere. So for the motor court, the idea was that we would obviously have ample backup space per code, but also that we could potentially park a couple other cars if we had guests in town. Again, these pavers would be a tone that matches the kind of granite outcroppings that are currently inconsistent with the specific plan. The house itself was designed to not step. Most of the homes, or a lot of the homes in this that are going to be coming before you in the Palisades, they step because depending on where your lot is located, some of the grading and terrain can be fairly steep with steep arroyos. This property allowed for us to really kind of anchor this portion of the house as slab on grade based on the current conditions on site. We then have what is like a bridge allowing for the natural arroyos that are in this location to then pick up and pass through both sides of the home you're seeing in. You can see in the model, actually, it's easier to kind of digest.
And if people would want to go down and look at the model while he's talking, that's fine.
I mean, the reason why we built the model is it's very helpful, especially for hillside homes, explaining conditions. So to the east, you're going to see that we have really kind of these picture windows that will then capture what we wanted to capture across the valley floor, a lot of the wind turbines, and then really kind of taking advantage of when you're inside of the pool area and looking north, you'll see that you get San Jacinto, and then you also get kind of the valley outcroppings from Palm Desert to La Quinta and beyond. And so for us, that was a priority in kind of laying out the home on this property. Also the challenge, and it's not necessarily a challenge, it's a good thing. I mean, the specific plan is very well written. It's going to produce some amazing architecture. The size of the home for the size of the lot, right, can't exceed 50% covered area. And so we're well below that. And so I think that's something that I wanted to at least say in this presentation, because I think a responsible way of designing on these lots is not to necessarily maximize them, but actually kind of take an understated approach and put the appropriate amount of square footage on these lots. The landscape, you'll see that the landscape, we did our best to allow for the landscape to be as native to its surroundings as possible. The comment about the trees is I'm sort of ambivalent on this one, because I didn't agree or disagree with it. It was a comment. I tend to like the linear nature of the trees. I think it reinforces the architecture. The comment that the AAC member made was in regards to whether it looks natural enough in that setting. And that's a fair question. I would tend to think that when the trees are planted, you won't see them as graphic as this, but again, happy to to change that orientation to help make them look a little more natural. Regarding the headlights, I was not aware of that concern. I know a lot was discussed. It's difficult right now to look at all of those conditions because there's only 2 homes built there. So the difficulty is guessing what this neighbor and this neighbor are going to design, right? So there's a challenge there in view corridors and also in kind of questioning where headlights are going to be because we just really don't know where these homes are going to be positioned. The kind of final design element that I think I wanted to bring up in this presentation is talking about the materials of the project. The specific plan is very strict and rigid in the material palette and what they expect from their applicants, owners, and architects. And for us, it was important to not just draw from what was around us from nature, but also the guardhouse, which everybody is probably familiar with at this point, just won an AIA award. Sean Lockyer did a fantastic job with really kind of establishing a archetype language that a lot of people are now following inside of the Palisades. So that was one thing, and the other thing is really kind of finding a vernacular architecture that represents being out here when it's 110 degrees and how those materials begin to evolve or devolve over time. And so I think what you'll see with the material palette is it's a delicate balance of being timeless, but also being rugged enough to take on the desert sort of terrain and climate.
Thank you. We'll have some questions for you. If you'd come back down. Some of the questions that were raised, can you explain the nature of the box that holds the equipment, what its materials are, how things breathe, what the height is?
Chair, can you turn on his microphone?
Oh, sorry.
So by code, you need at least 3 feet in front of any enclosure for whether it's an air conditioning unit, condenser, or pool equipment for anybody to work on it. So what we've done is again, as Glenn described, we've moved it off of the property line, put it in it's what would be considered the side yard, and the material is a Cor-Ten that would then relate to the house, so it's kind of drawing that language back to the facade. It would be open air because it would need to vent, and it would have doors on it. And so it would be a fairly modest structure, but it would be really well done and executed in a way that the house would be built.
The second question that was generally asked is, can you explain the pool enclosure from the street and what the height of is it at the lowest portion that it extends to?
And the highest portion, I'm assuming, right?
It's the highest, yeah. Interior, it's the same,
right.
But
so this is the difficulty with the specific plan and the language that is in the specific plan, and also kind of working with local codes, and also being in a hillside area with boulders. The conversation becomes quite academic as to what is right and wrong. The challenge with this wall really is that the majority of it is at 5 feet below based on boulder grade. But as you would see, as the wall gets closer to the street, it does become compromised in that height, and it is less than 5 feet. So we would propose in that location putting like a glass rail at that location.
can you point that out?
Sure, absolutely. Perfect. That's perfect. So in this location, you'll see that the grade comes down and is much higher than, let's say, here. At this point right here is roughly 5 feet. At this point here, we're at about 3 feet. Obviously, from inside finished grade, we're at 5 feet. However, the question really is whether somebody can jump over a fence into your pool. So the way that we would resolve that issue is that we would do a glass rail to a certain location to get natural grade at 5 feet for protection. And this is going to be the challenge with a lot of these homes because of the natural grade of these homes and how they're positioned as to where they calculate that height for that fence.
At this point, I think those were the general questions. So Commissioner Hirschbein, do you want to?
So what height do you think it's going to be at its highest point to the east?
Here, it's just under 7 feet. So this is what's a little bit different is that's from native terrain, right? Our house already steps down 4 feet. So from street level, that you're not going to be confronted with that wall. I think that's the misconception that AAC had. They didn't understand that if you're standing at Wintersun Drive, that wall is not 7 feet. You're actually probably viewing it more like 3 feet because we were trying to work with the natural terrain.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yes, Commissioner
Only
Kellerdyne, sorry.
sorry.
Let me just,
Sure.
Yeah, could you walk me through the drainage on the site, and particularly what's happened with the water coming down the driveway, maybe from the street?
Yep. So part of the major architectural submittals, we have to do a civil plan. And in our civil plan, we don't have that in the presentation. Okay, I can walk you through. So our civil plan, what it has done is, obviously there's a delicate balance with the percentage of water that hits permeable surfaces and then actually having that to percolate back into the soil. Mm-hmm. The water that is hitting impervious surfaces, such as roofs, that are then directed into drainage systems into the arroyos. There's 2 arroyos on the project. We have redirected all of the rainwater that collects on the roof into those arroyos. Down at the bottom of each arroyo will be a collection pit. So that's what we're doing with all of the water runoff that hits our property.
Well, I'm just trying to think of more of a sheet flow situation, a heavy rain where water is coming down the driveway with the house being, 7 feet below grade. How will that rainwater flow down the driveway, get under the house to the arroyos?
So you're talking about here?
Right.
Correct. Well, the grade will redirect around the house. There's, anytime you have sheet flow coming towards the house. So
it's going to go around the house? Then.
Okay. Only at this location, because that's the only location that's actually blocking.
Okay.
This, if you can see on the model, it lifts up, and that's where the water does pass underneath the home.
So the one wing is on grade, so the water doesn't go under it, right?
That's correct.
The other wing is where it is above grade, and the water could theoretically go under it.
That's correct, but we also do, per our civil plan, we do have various drains located in here that will then take the water into the arroyos. So the water that doesn't hit that drain will then divert around the house.
Can you kind of walk me through the 2 different arroyos that you said that we have, and what happens to them?
Yeah, so we have one here that runs underneath the main portion of the building of the public space, the kitchen, living, and dining. And then we have one here that is located under the master. So you can see that in this location, we have taken an opportunity to, because it's xeriscaping, to plant in those locations for the natural runoff. And then also in this location as well, which is the arroyo wraps around here and then through this location. So there's 2 of them. This arroyo on this portion, if you follow this line, if you're familiar with that berm along Tramway Road, they've actually broken the berm right there. And so to allow for that arroyo to run through.
Okay. One other technical question, pretty minor, but I'm sure you've addressed it, but you're 5 feet, or 7 feet below the street?
No, we're 4 feet below the street.
Okay, and the sewer line's in the street?
That's correct.
And it's at a depth that you don't have to pump or anything?
It's 12 feet underneath the street.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Going back to Commissioner Donenfeld, who was asking a question.
It was really related to the pool wall. Again, when you said you're going to add some glass at the top so that you get more elevation, you'll stop at some point, I assume.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
Other questions, Commissioner Hirschbein?
On that east face, by the way, it's, can we do a comment now or just?
No, questions.
Comment, sorry, so check that. The east facade, the glazing, are you concerned at all about heat gain? Because that's a lot of glazing. We got some hot mornings coming up.
Yeah. So the way that the house is actually positioned is that it will get some morning sun. Based on the orientation, though, that sun will get around that house before the sun does actually get super hot and start actually penetrating that glazing. The reality is that we'll never be able to protect all surfaces in the desert. And the only opportunity to have the majority of glazing and for kind of vistas or view portals is on the eastern glazing, so we really took advantage of that. But certainly I understand your concern. We will be, this house will obviously conform to Title 24, so all the energy calculations will conform. But no, to be honest with you, I'm not concerned because that is the eastern glazing.
Any questions from Commissioner Maruzzi or Commissioner Woods?
Regarding the gatehouse, what did you say what is the term you're using for the new standard? What regarding the materials that were used?
It's a Corten, so it's a material that doesn't lose its structural value as it rusts. So galvanized is going to rust, and most engineers hate that by the water because as it rusts, it loses its structural capabilities. Corten is actually it's designed to withstand its structural capabilities while it's rusting. The idea of Corten is that it's a living material, and so as the weather changes, as it rains, as it gets cold, and we get dew in the air, the facade begins to express whatever the climate is of that location. So it's a great material to use, and it's a great standard, I think, set up, especially in the Palisades.
That's what influenced you in the Corten?
It was. I mean, we have a lot of projects in LA, and I'm also been wanting to use it, so it was an opportunity.
Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Wood, did you have questions? I had a couple, just materials. The large wall, the block wall, is that block?
Yes,
It
it's
looked-
CMU.
And the color on it is,
So it's a,
it said when Glenn presented, he said it was a gray, but it doesn't appear to be a gray when we look at it.
right, so it's a gray that is burnished. So when anytime you burnish a stone, it brings out the natural aggregate of that stone. So here we go. It's better up here on the screen. When you burnish something, you see the red start to come out, so it'll tie back into the Corten.
Okay.
And then the actual color is similar to the rock outcroppings of that location.
I was wondering what that material was because it didn't look like the wall below.
It's a bit graphic in here, but that's pretty much what you can expect.
And then the Corten, as just a question, I lived in Boston for a long time, and they used a lot of Corten in the 60s, and it weeped. It had all sorts of stains on it, didn't maintain that gorgeous look. Is there any treatment on the Corten you're using, or do you intend it to weep?
Yeah, so great question. I was trying to put that in my presentation, but I forgot. So Corten today, there's a treatment that actually stops the weeping or stops the oxidation process. So typically the way to do Corten today is they set it out, oxidize it, they control it with a brush, and then once they get the desired texture, we then finish that. That finish then stops the weeping from happening. The gatehouse, if you go up to it today, has no weeping on it. Sean Lockyer did the same exact process.
Right, so, and the other questions I have concern the AAC comments. I'm actually very sympathetic to the headlights question. And also the tree configuration. So if you could put maybe the landscape slide back up, if you were to change the linear nature of the trees at all, where would you put them, and are you willing to do any kind of treatment that would block the only area where I think the headlights could be a problem would be people parking there? And so is there something that you could do in that area that would alleviate that as a potential problem?
Sure. Well, to address the tree question, I believe in our discussions at the AAC, it was really kind of as simple as taking maybe this center tree and kind of putting it up here. So it was more irregular. Again, I'm fine with that. For me, we typically, when we design, we like to use trees and to formalize an entrance into a space. This, again, is kind of a heavy-handed approach to being very linear and reinforcing the architecture, but I didn't disagree with the comment. I'm happy to kind of take that tree and move it up, and then same here, they were hoping to do this the same with that tree arrangement. Regarding the headlights, obviously, it's good to be neighborly, and it's good to be aware of these things, and so if there is something that, a recommendation for the headlights, I'm happy to investigate that. It's a difficult conversation because I don't know where the next house is going to be, and so
Right.
where they're going to put their driveway, where they're going to put their house, and how they're going to situate it.
Are there any other questions before the applicant, before we send this to ourselves?
I just wanted to make a comment. I really appreciate your concern about not knowing what your neighbors are going to look like, how they're going to position their homes. And I also think, in keeping with the spirit of these incredible
We're
design...
not at comments yet.
No, but I just... Oh, okay. All right. you're right.
We'll hold it. Yes, questions?
I see in the board what the driveway material is. That's both the driveway and the parking material is supposed to be like. Is that?
No, that's just the vertical surface, the CMU.
Okay, so what are we using for the driveway and parking surface?
It'll be interlocking paver that's permeable. That will be similar to the interlocking pavers that have been used on the development currently.
Okay, great, thank you.
So I think thank you very much. I think at this point, we'll take this to the commission for comments. Starting with Commissioner Callardine.
I think this is, again, one of the great houses of Palm Springs. The other two houses up there that we've approved are spectacular as well, but this will be a worthy addition. I think with regard to the headlight problem, we might simply require some additional landscaping at the end of the motor court to the side. I don't think that's a problem. I tend to like the linear trees, but I'm not like the architect. I could go either way if the commission has a strong feeling about it either way. When it comes to the time for a motion, I could move something like that.
Other comments?
I think it's a terrific project. Again, we're really, although as controversial as Desert Palisades has been over the years, it's spurring some incredibly innovative architecture. And this is treating the topography beautifully. It's sitting beautifully. I would prefer a linear landscaping. That's just my more modern aesthetic. With respect to the headlight issue, what I was going to say earlier is, in keeping with the spirit of the design guidelines for Pacific Palisades, I think we want to keep as many appurtenances and structures away from the project as possible. If you built a wall, that would be inappropriate, I would think, for something like that. Perhaps there's an innovative way you can use some landscaping, but again, you don't want to over-landscape this site because the alluvial fan itself isn't that well landscaped. So I think maybe it's something that you'd want to look at once you've got neighbors. I really don't think it's something we can fix now, but I'm very much in favor of the project overall, and I think you've done a great job.
We have a request to speak from the planning director.
Madam Chair, what I might suggest, since there has been a concern about the headlights, what we might do is add a condition of approval that allows staff to review with the applicant the possibility of either using a low boulder berm or plantings to screen the headlights from adjacent properties in the street.
I think it's a creative solution.
And that's...
But I would suggest that only at the time that another house is being proposed, so you can see if it's even necessary.
No.
You can't do it.
We can't do it that way.
Yeah,
We can't require them to come back.
You can't require them to come back.
Not to us, to the staff.
Yeah, you can't
No,
require
no,
that.
you can't.
Once it's built, it's done.
There's a difficulty in trying to come in afterwards and require them to do something. It's easier to address the issue up front as part of the approval. And I think what we would suggest is something that would be relatively low impact in terms of the site and its natural features.
Any other comments? Commissioner Hirschbein.
Yeah, I'd like to echo the previous comments about what a great architectural addition this will be to our community. And unfortunately, it's not going to be seen by a lot of people, but, you know, I'm hoping that our public architecture rises to this level in the future as well. I don't know, I could go either way also on those trees. My natural inclination would be to make it more random, more naturalized. I get the linear quality because of the house, but it's not the house, it's the landscape. I think I would prefer a more naturalized use of the landscape.
Do we have a motion from you?
I'd like to make one. I'd like to move the staff recommendation, including what we recently discussed regarding staff review of the potential boulder and landscaping at the edges of the motor court. And although it doesn't, I don't think it requires a motion, I would keep it linear. That is part of my motion. And then they can obviously have an amendment at that point, but that would be my motion. I don't know if there's anything else we need to pick up, Madam Chair?
I have not heard any concern regarding the hardscape area. The roof color has been resolved. We've got two minor issues. One is the naturalized landscape, and I just want to see what my feeling would be more naturalized. It's not a very strong feeling. I'm more concerned about the headlights, but I'm wondering, just in terms of the commission, where people stand on that. Commissioner Woods?
Before I speak, I just have a couple questions of staff, if I could. Under the conditions of approval, I think under the administrative conditions of approval, that there's a condition, let me tell you the number just so, they'll abide by all rules and regulations. And then there's conditions on things like air quality, things of that nature. Does the city ever do a construction mitigation plan on new construction, where they submit a plan basically to the city engineer or the engineering department, and they review, making sure there's not other construction going on at the same time, that the truck schedule is within the hours of operation, et cetera, et cetera?
Right, so the applicant would have to obtain a PM10 permit, which would be part of the grading permit, which would discuss all these issues of dust and fencing and those types of issues you just mentioned.
But a construction mitigation plan encompasses a lot of things that are in the code and maybe even outside of the code, such as, because the code addresses things like hours of operation, PM10, all of that, but it may not address 3 projects being built at the same time, things of that nature. And this may not apply. I'm just asking if the city ever adds a condition for requiring a construction mitigation plan.
Typically, no, we have not, but that's certainly something that staff has discussed and is a larger community concern. So again, we don't do that as a practice now, but may look at doing that in the near future.
Just a couple other questions. My understanding, the Desert Palisades specific plan was designed with interlocking pavers as the main roadway. And then there's a gravel shoulder on each side of that interlocking pavers. And that gravel shoulder is for parking purposes.
I'm not aware that that is the case. The gravel shoulder was a condition that be added to the shoulders of the road.
Right, and there's no, I believe there's nothing, I was trying to pull up the conditions of approval, nothing says you can't park on the street. But I just wanted to ask if we can go to page 12 of 26 and 13 of 26. On 12 of 26, there's number 4, it's called driveways and parking. And part of the parking was to minimize the impact of parking from the streets, visual parking from the street. And then number 5 is that they don't want a lot of cars grouped together to make it appear as if it's a parking lot. These are direct conditions from the specific plan. And I'm just going back to the AAC comment about reducing the size.
You were citing pages, are those in our staff report?
Yes, in your staff report, it is page 12 of 26. I'll let you get there. It would be number 4 at the very bottom of the page. It says minimize visual impacts of parking from the street. And then if you go to the next page, page 13 of 26, number 5, it's basically about grouping the parking. My assumption is that both of those really have to do with not providing parking lots within a residential area. And I'm just going back to the AAC comment. It appears when you look at this that you can park 2 cars in the garage on site, 2 cars in front of the garage on site, 2 cars in the area where you're talking about the headlights, and then 2 cars straight on in tandem, which gives a huge parking lot to this whole area. And I just, I bring that up as if all of that is actually necessary when parking is, there's plenty of parking on site and parking is permitted on the street.
So you're going to the question of, is the permeable surface too large, the parking area?
That's correct. I'm just going to that question that was brought up by the AAC.
Commissioner Hirschbein.
So actually, I don't believe your analysis supports your conclusion because it talks about covered parking. It doesn't say the motor court. It says garages and carports may be freestanding, but encouraged to be integrated with the main structure, which it is. Covered parking for more than 2 cars to be broken up into multiple masses. It doesn't talk about uncovered parking in that.
I guess that we've got a couple of issues before us. We were talking about first linear trees or free flow trees. And maybe I want to go back to that before we get to the surface. Is there a general feeling on that for people here? Does anybody?
I like the linear approach. That's the architect's design. I like it.
Commissioner Woods?
So,
before we get to parking, let's just finish that one issue.
So when we look at the linear trees, if I just regurgitate a little bit about what the AAC was talking about, there is no doubt that it has an architectural element to that, and I think that was even acknowledged both by the applicant and it was acknowledged by the AAC, that it's got a beautiful architectural element. The question is that architectural element actually appropriate in this setting? And 2 issues came up at AAC as I was the rep that was sitting on that. One is the house next door for the trees that are on the far back of the site to the rear of the property. You know, they can grow high enough to maybe block a view. And the front ones also give you a linear approach to something that we really wanted to see through the specific plan and through its conditions, very naturalized. So these homes are and the greenery of these homes are very visible from throughout the valley floor. And the idea is grouping them or bunching them, not eliminating them necessarily, but grouping them or bunching them would maintain that naturalized state, maybe eliminate any blockage to a neighbor that came up. Although I love linear, and I love the concept of linear here, and I agree with the applicant, I do think that bunching them for the overall feeling of the site, since it is so predominant, has a very large benefit.
So I'm looking at 3-3 linear bunched, so linear and more free flow.
I'm persuaded by Mr. Wood's argument.
We got a majority.
So we've got a majority for.
I'll accept it as a friendly amendment.
So it's accepted by the seconder. Let's go to the last issue, which is the percentage of whether there is too much paved surface in terms of parking. May I comment on that? I spent a couple of weeks up there docenting one of the houses in Modernism last year. And they had a fairly large entry, 2 entry areas, I believe, where people were parking. It didn't seem to take away from the site. I do agree that there's street parking. But as long as it's permeable, I don't know that it, and because there's a 14-foot buffer and maybe 24 feet, an additional setback to the next house, and most of it will feel like it's setback for that neighbor, I'm not sure it really creates a problem. And given that this is, from what I've heard, this is a house where currently the applicant's parents are planning on living, it would be good to have the parking be easy for the people that are going to live there or stay there. So I'm sympathetic to what the AAC thought. I think they're usually really good. I'm just not sure that with the distances and with the design guidelines that we need to limit this. So this is just me speaking, but I don't know if anybody else agrees with me.
I agree.
I would agree, and I'd also add that this isn't going to be a party house.
Exactly.
So the infrequent times that they have parties with necessity for additional parking will be few and far between, I'm sure.
That was going to be my point.
And my biggest concern is we don't want to see parking on the street.
Yeah, and I hope that when they open this up for Modernism Week, that the association allows some parking on the street. So I think we have pretty much agreement on that. I know Commissioner Woods doesn't agree with that item, but is for the maker and the seconder, I just want to make sure that we've got.
You're the seconder.
I am the seconder, but is there, I've heard from Commissioner Donenfeld, Commissioner Marucci, and Commissioner Hirschbein, are you okay with the pavement as suggested?
My preference would be to reduce the amount of paving, but given the overall quality of the architecture, I have a high trust level that this will be a very well-designed project in the end.
Are there any other comments before we get Commissioner Woods?
I just want to say that, you know, our Architectural Advisory Committee had a chance to review this, and they asked the applicant several questions, and I was very, very impressed, having been the representative for the Architectural Advisory Committee, on the breadth and the professionalism of that committee and the way that they addressed the questions and whatnot. And I just really want to acknowledge each member of that committee for the job that they do in reviewing and the talent that they give us. And my point of the parking was, because I was the representative, is to tell you their viewpoint. It wasn't whether I was against or for it, just to let you know what their viewpoint was. I also want to say that Desert Palisades specific plan, the developer, Pinnacle View, has accused me of bias and prejudice against this project. And I just want to clarify for the record that there is no bias and there's absolutely no prejudice against the Desert Palisades specific plan. The plan was approved before my arrival into the city of Palm Springs. It has been on the books. I know there are some that did not want development within the open alluvial fan. I was not here to have an opinion for or against that. I think the project itself is a great example of how to develop in a hillside development, especially on something that's so predominant in this type of setting. We would like to see it repeated in other areas of the city completely. When the developer built out the project, however, there were a myriad of problems that we as a neighborhood that I live in had to address with the developer that became very visible. That in no way prejudiced or biased me against this project. And in fact, I think, as the other commissioners had said, that the architectural integrity and the architects that are coming to develop in this area are really making this a very unique and special place, different from anything else in the Coachella Valley. And I applaud Mr. Woods very heavily for not only coming forward with a well-thought-out plan, having a personal investment in that plan, choosing quality materials in that plan, paying attention to details in that plan, and being so respectful and so excited about building here that I really, really thank you. And I think you have provided us with a great project. Thank you for the few tweaks we've given you as a city and for accepting those. So thank you very much.
We might also add that Commissioner Woods and the applicant are not related. I just realized they shared a last name.
At this point, we have a motion and a second. I don't think we need additional comments. We all feel it's a terrific project. Can we call the roll? And I think you need to turn those off.
We voted.
This passes 6-0 with 1 absent. Congratulations.
Madam Chair? Can I ask the staff on one thing? It's not an issue on this project, but it's a general question, maybe for in the future. In the conditions on one section, we have basically requiring payments to the MSHC. Damn it. Oh, it's this thing. I got to turn it. Take this out of my pocket. I'm having a.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. You did a great job.
Congratulations. Looking forward to seeing it.
Invite us all to this.
There's a requirement in there in one place to pay the THCP fees, and another condition says to pay the MSHCP fees if it's not in the THCP. We ought to be able to figure out whether it is or it isn't, which one it's in, and just require that in the future.
I will just say that we have these as standard conditions where it may not be applicable, then obviously we do not collect the fees.
Well, let's pick the one that applies, rather than having them both in there.
Moving right along so that we can get out of here by 4 o'clock. Planning Commissioner reports, requests, and comments. My fellow commissioners? Yes.
There was a report on local news that Mr. Braun has delayed his timetable for the Virgin Hotel. Were you aware of that?
Sorry, I was not aware of that, nor has that been discussed at the City Council.
All right, I was just wondering how that might impact the agreements that are in place. So if you're not aware of it, you wouldn't know that. Okay.
What's the status of the Virgin Hotel?
Not aware of it.
Again, the status and the time frame remains the same as was approved in the development agreement. So they're not anticipating getting started with the project until 2019.
The only comment I have is if you could talk about the subcommittees we have and when the meetings will be. The only other one is that the golf course conversion ordinance committee met this morning. We worked with our attorney on sort of finalizing concepts we wanted within the language. He's going to go back and redraft into appropriate Palm Springs legalese the ordinance, and it will be coming back for one more review. Hopefully only one more review to the subcommittee before it comes back here, but that may be, we may be waiting until sometime in July for that to come back. Just maybe hopefully in June, but I'm not sure given vacations and things. I know we can't get back in May.
In terms of the Plan Development District Subcommittee, I would like to meet with you all on Monday at 2 p.m. If you could just check your calendars and let me know afterwards.
That'll be after the ethics meeting on Monday?
Correct. That gives us about a half an hour in between.
And the other subcommittee that is meeting or supposed to be meeting on the with HSPB on the demolitions, has a meeting been scheduled?
It has not yet. We discussed that at the Historic Site Preservation Board meeting yesterday. We are looking at the availability of our HSPB members. Mr. Priest will also be working with that subcommittee as well. We'll probably have our first meeting about 2 weeks out, is what I'm guessing. And members Donenfeld and Maruzzi are the representatives for the Planning Commission on that subcommittee. And so Ms. Hintz will be getting with you here in the near future to schedule that.
Okay, and I think that concludes Planning Commission comments. Is there a director's report?
Yes, as Vice Chair Callardine has already indicated, we do have our training for all of our board and commission members on Monday, May the 14th, this coming Monday. It starts at 11:30 and is expected to end at 1:30. Lunch will be served. It will be held at the Convention Center in the Smoke Tree Rooms. We'll be reviewing issues such as the Brown Act and other similar things that boards and commissions need to know in carrying out their duties. So again, we hope to see you there on Monday.
Since I'm going to be out of town for sure, it's being taped, correct?
I believe that it is, yes.
Good.
And then,
You received in your packets a CEQA evaluation. This is for a project that will be coming to you in the future. We wanted to provide you the CEQA documentation so that you would have time to review it prior to considering the case.
Flynn, I had sent you, I believe, some material I received from the HSPB chair on the historic background of the cabin in the Tockwitz ditch on that property. Would you be willing to circulate that to the other commissioners?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that.
Does Tockwitz, where's
That property contains both a historic cabin and remnants, they believe, of the Tockwitz ditch.
Oh, I got the property that we're looking at in the initial study.
Yes. And I think, is there an opening this week downtown?
An opening. We just had Tommy Bahama's.
We had it?
That's tomorrow, though.
Yeah, sorry.
I thought it was opening yesterday.
The retail.
Was
I
it
thought
yesterday?
they had their soft opening April 30th. Did I get that date wrong? I had Tommy Bahama, the restaurant. The retail store is already open.
Right.
But I believe the restaurant was scheduled to open here. I can't remember. I had sent
Mayor
the
Moon
email out to
posted
you
something
all.
on Facebook. I thought he said this Thursday.
Oh,
But we
okay.
looked at it last night, and it said it was open, but
When I ran by this morning at 5:30 a.m., there were people in there.
Well, maybe they're having a soft and then they're having a grand. I don't know.
Yeah. Again,
We
I'll go
never
back
get
to the
invited.
email that I sent.
yeah, that's something that be nice if we got invited to some of these projects when they have their grand openings.
When I receive the invitations, I do try and forward them to you.
Thank you. I
So
think,
the Chamber of Commerce, just as an FYI on that same thing, the Chamber of Commerce set out a notice that the official ribbon cutting, not necessarily the opening or not necessarily the party or the soft opening, but the official ribbon cutting is Thursday, starting at 10 o'clock, from 10 to 10:30.
thank you. With that, there being no more comments, I'm going to adjourn the meeting until the May
23rd.
May 23rd at 1:30. Thank you.
I'm gonna kill these two.